Organized money.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it. Hey, so today we're going to talk about pricing. And I say we, I mean me, because Dave is still on vacation. Eurovision is over, so I don't know what he's doing, but he's on vacation. But I have an awesome guest for you today. It's actually a colleague of mine. He's a lawyer, an antitrust lawyer at the American Economic Liberties Project, which is also where I work. But he is doing some of the most innovative legal thinking and policy making around what's called surveillance pricing, which is setting a price of a good or service based on the personal characteristics of the person doing the buying. So, someone is like, say a Google or some data broker has a bunch of information about you because of your browsing history, because of your geographic location, whatever it is. And then they use that information to set a price for you that is different than the price that they set for someone else. And there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the economy now that is, that involves surge pricing, personalized pricing, new forms of price fixing. It's happening with rent, it's happening with meat, it's happening with office supplies. And Lee is right in the middle of it. He's working on legislation. He's working with state legislators. A lot of the policy work here is happening at a state legislative level. And then there are antitrust cases. So we're going to talk to him about all of that. It's a really interesting episode. And here we go, organized money. So thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you are working in this really interesting area of kind of the new pricing games that a bunch of companies are playing in the economy, good and bad. But you're working in the policy space, so trying to figure out how to apply traditional anti-monopoly frameworks to those new practices. Why don't we start with something that I think a lot of people have heard of, which is this company called RealPage. Like what is because I want to introduce the concept of surveillance pricing with something that I think is understandable. So what is the situation with RealPage, and what have been some of the experiences and then that people have had with RealPage, and then what we'll get into sort of some of the policy pushback to it.
Sure. So, RealPage is a company that is essentially a price consultant. They allow specifically landlords to use their platform, their software, to predict and set prices in rental housing markets across the country. And RealPage really kind of came on the scene and started attracting a lot more attention because of a ProPublica report a few years ago now that was describing how RealPage, the software, was allegedly being used to hike prices across rental housing markets. Primarily, these markets function locally in geographic regions, and RealPage was out there bragging about how its software was allowing landlords to increase their prices, increase rents by double digits. And of course, this attracted outrage, right? Like, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. There's all these, policy conversations taking place about how to increase supply, how to bring rents down. And here's a company out there advertising openly, hey, we can make sure that your rents go up. And so they attracted a lot of blowback, and it turns out that this was part of an alleged price fixing scheme, a conspiracy among otherwise independent competitors in a market to fix prices at a supra competitive rate, a higher rate than what ordinary market conditions would allow for, and to really kind of put a lot of pressure on tenants who are already feeling it.
So this was millions of apartment units in certain cities owned by dozens of corporate landlords, but they were effectively all colluding through this software consulting firm. Is that right?
Right. So, I mean, there's a fact dispute about, their market
Allegedly,
penetration.
right.
Yeah. But generally that's right. That these price fixing schemes, any price fixing conspiracy, allows independent competitors to act as one, and to
Hmm.
remove from the market the healthy competition that would otherwise create downward pressure on prices because you want to get heads in beds. And if you got a bunch of vacancies in your building, the natural thing to do is bring rents down so that people will, occupy them.
But this was so this is this was this also holding apartments off the market or allegedly? I don't want to
Yeah.
say that they were doing this, but what when they say we were pushing up prices, presumably they were saying to landlords, hey, keep the price high even if no one's coming in to buy it because you'll make more money. I mean, that's how all cartels and price fixing conspiracies work, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the effect of a price fixing conspiracy is both on price and on output. Those things are, of course, related. When you have more output or supply, price tends to come down. What is really interesting is this chart in the class action case based out of Tennessee right now, that shows that about the time that these price fixing tools started taking hold in the market. Um, Pre 2015 or so, as occupancies increase, prices come down. Or rather, I'm sorry, as vacancies increase, prices come down. And that's what you would expect. You have a glut of supply, you expect prices to come down. Post the implementation of these price fixing conspiracies, you start seeing a very disturbing trend, which is that vacancies
Alleged conspiracies.
alleged conspiracies is that you start seeing vacancies increase and the trend line on prices is also increasing. That is counterintuitive to a healthy market, right? If supply increase, price comes down. Here you have vacancies or supply increasing and prices continuing to go up. That is a very disturbing trend. And it indicates that what might be going on is exactly what you said, that these price fixing conspiracies are allowing businesses to hold supply off the market because they can make their revenue targets with a limited supply because they're hiking the rents on those units that they are leasing out. And what you ultimately are seeing is just speculation. So if you have a market downturn, you're not going to see prices come down. You're going to see, oh, we're going to raise the rents on the units that we do have occupied until, the market rent continues to go up, and we feel comfortable leasing out new units at a higher rate. So it's just depriving, users or rather renters of the benefits of increased supply at a time when it seems like the political imperative is to increase housing supply.
Right. So it's sort of inducing an artificial housing shortage or accelerating a housing shortage. I think my favorite point from the case is when they were saying, like, I lived in one of these apartment buildings, which actually turned out was using RealPage software. There's just all sorts of weird things that was going on there. My favorite thing is that what they were doing is they were encouraging some of these landlords to use like oddly timed um, leases, like 11 months or 13 months or 15 months to give you a slightly better deal because they knew that they didn't want to put too many renters on the market at the same time, or they wanted to put people on the market at the same time as there wasn't going to be that much supply. So it was just like there was all this clear market manipulation allegedly going on. But I think in some of the complaints, so I thought it was very clever. But here's a kind of a question because we want to get into broad pricing dynamics happening across the board. Is the kind of RealPage style alleged newfangled smoky back zoom pricing, is that happening in other industries or is it just rentals?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we're observing in many industries, and a lot of this is playing out in litigation. You see cases against meatpacking industry, a company called Agristats, allegedly facilitating a price fixing scheme among meat packers. You see in another case against hotels and casinos on the Las Vegas Strip, facilitating price fixing in that market. There's one of them is a case involving a platform called Potato Track. that allegedly fixed the price of frozen potatoes. And that has, that sounds like kind of silly, but it has real implications for, downstream small business restaurants who are, trying to buy potatoes to serve to their consumers, and suddenly there's this weird market distortion where the price of, frozen potatoes is going up. So you see it across markets and pop up repeatedly in interesting ways. And that's, price fixing always has done that. I think what we're observing now is the use of these pricing algorithms to facilitate it at a broader scale.
So you've helped on some like there's been legislation to address RealPage, right? That you've worked on. I mean, there's antitrust cases, but like, can you talk a little bit about the legislation you've helped sort of create and what's happening around in among policymakers to address this kind of rent fixing, I guess?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we wrote a report on algorithmic price fixing, a year and a half, 2 years ago. I think there are now 18 states that have introduced legislation specifically targeting algorithmic price fixing. You see a bunch of cities getting into the game as well. I mean, it's really exploded. There are something like 12 federal cases against price fixing in the rental housing market specifically. You see state AGs bringing cases in Arizona and Washington, D.C. under, state or municipal law. So it's an issue that has kind of exploded. And it's really interesting to see a lot of those pieces of legislation will specifically address the rental housing market and companies like RealPage and Yardi and their alleged bad behavior. Some of them are even broader. There's a lot of interesting little pieces of these conversations. One of them is that, for instance, price fixing schemes often involve the exchange of non-public competitor data. And the reason that they focus on the exchange of that sensitive information is because, as an independent business, I have no, economic self-interest in sharing my proprietary data with my competitor unless I am engaged in a funky conspiracy to fix the market. So there's been a lot of focus on the exchange of this non-public competitor data, but you also see that the problem is bigger than that. And that you can actually facilitate a price fixing scheme without any sharing of non-public competitor data. There can be all sorts of ways for that conspiracy to manifest. I'm kind of the opinion, which is a little bit, it's not, I think, taken kind of mainstream hold, but that if you are offering a pricing algorithm that uses the same data and that performs the same function, and you are sending that to many competitors in a market, or just two competitors in a market, with the intent that they use it to set prices, or to recommend prices or adopt recommended prices, that itself is a form of collusion. It might be a soft form of collusion. It might be a soft form of market manipulation, but the common use of a common algorithm to deprive markets of independent centers of decision making is a conspiracy.
So, okay, but I just want to get back to RealPage for just 2 seconds. It's been banned in San Francisco and Philadelphia, right? Like, or not the software, but the use of the because RealPage also
Yeah.
does like inventory management. So it's just like software for buildings, but the particular provision which recommends pricing,
Mhm.
that's illegal in San Francisco and Philadelphia and a couple of other places, right?
Yeah, and maybe I know too much, and I've got a couple caveats for you there. But I mean, San Francisco, really focused on the exchange of non-public information, whereas
Mhm.
Berkeley, took a broader approach and tried to address the exchange of any information that can be used to predict and set and fix prices. Berkeley is getting sued by RealPage. San Francisco is not. So you see how some of these policy distinctions are attracting different responses from RealPage. RealPage, who I've seen in many a public forum at this point, are out there advocating that they're fine if these pieces of legislation only focus on the exchange of non-public information. I think part of that might be a kind of recognition that they know that they can fix markets without that information. But yes, to your point, lots of cities are doing this. San Francisco, Berkeley, Philadelphia. I think Portland was giving it a shot.
I'm trying to give you credit, and all you do is nuance it out, man. Try to give you
uh,
credit. I can't get it done.
we
So
were very excited.
I
I was very excited to be involved in San Francisco being the first city to address algorithmic price
I,
fixing, and, and
I,
it's really
I
kind of
just think it's a
exploded.
big deal because you've had your hand in this. The reason I want to talk to you, I mean, we're colleagues, right? And I like you. I think you're smart and everything. But I also think you're doing really innovative work, and it's work that's having an impact. So that's why I wanted to, this is a big deal to write legislation or to help with legislation that addresses, I think, these new ways of engaging in pricing and actually have some of them pass, right? Which is what's happened. So I just kind of that's what I wanted to get at, because I think it's easy to talk about these things and just be like, oh, woe is me, and there's no possibility. But it's like, no, stuff is happening here, and I think there's lots of states that are interested. And then there's antitrust things. Also, it's important to note, RealPage wasn't just doing this like funky algorithm thing. They were also just having meetings, right? Like they were doing the standard things you do with if you were price fixing, or that what the complaints allege. Like they were getting the landlords together to like, you know, talk to each other about how to set
Right,
prices. So it's
right.
it's not like it's not all fancy newfangled algorithmic stuff. But
Yeah.
um, okay, so let's talk about sort of broader, like, I think a lot of us heard about Wendy's a couple of months ago or a year ago saying, you know what, maybe we'll do this like surge pricing for our restaurant because now we can change the prices like on the fly. And then you see, a lot of supermarkets that are starting to say, you know what, we're not going to have like paper price tags anymore. We're going to have electronic price tags and we can kind of change them. And on hot days, we'll charge more for ice cream or whatever it is. Like, when did you kind of like, what are the things that the public is sort of seeing that something that sort of indicates to them something weird is going on with pricing?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is, I think, under the broad category of price innovation, that corporations are conducting all of these little experiments.
That's a euphemistic way to, who are you working for, man?
Well, that's what they'll call it, right? Price
Yeah,
innovation,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
price
Fun,
optimization,
price funnovation.
funovation. Yeah. But the subjects of that innovation are, of
Right.
course, consumers. Consumers are experiencing this. One kind of thing that's been noted, if you go on, popular e-commerce platforms, of which there is, one, called Amazon, you might be charged a kind of weird, mysterious price, like $7.62 for a package of Band-Aids or something. And you might scratch your head and like, wait, where did that price come from? Why is, what is going on here? And I think that there's a lot of experimentation that is being conducted in these markets that is at the expense of consumer awareness, and is really trying to dull price sensitivity, so that consumers will pay whatever price a corporation predicts they will pay for that.
So why, just before we get into the specifics of these new tactics and some of the things you're
Yeah.
doing there, why does it matter to have like the same price for the same item for everyone?
I think for a lot of reasons. I mean, one of them is just, the Suze Orman financial planning ethos. It's you should be able to plan for your expenses. It's That's how you decide whether to take a job because it's paying you enough money or not. How much money you have in your bank account, how you put family or put
Okay,
food
but
on the
but let
table.
me let me
Yeah.
let me try to get at something I think a little different, which is that like, okay, if you and I go on to Amazon or Uber or whatever and we get charged a different price for the same thing, right?
Mhm.
Like you get charged $7 for the Band-Aids and I get charged $7.20 for the Band-Aids.
Sure.
Like, and we talk to each other and we're like, wait, you're getting different prices. I think we'd both be like, that's not cool,
Right.
right? But it's 20 cents. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. But both of us would be like, this is weird and not cool. There's something beyond the planning and the pricing and the like, there's something there about having a price that we can all see that I think is something going on there, like morally, where we're like, it's not good if we're just treated differently in this sort of arbitrary way. So what do you think is
Right.
happening? Like, how do we think about price really as like on like a core level?
Well, I mean, To address the example that you put out there, I mean, you talk about an interesting hypothetical where you actually know that you're paying a different price than the person next to you for an Uber ride or for,
Right.
diapers. I think what's problematic is that you often don't know that this is happening. And when you can't
But
look and
I asked you about the when you do know it because I
yeah.
think it says the question is there because it's like something about our pricing, our view of fairness. There's
Mhm.
something about fairness, like a deep human desire for fairness, which says that prices should be like they should be the same for the same if we're getting the same thing
Yeah.
and we're the same, it's the same class of service, we should get the same price for it,
Yeah.
right? And that's why I say that's why it's important in this hypothetical to say, yeah, we know that we're getting different prices, and why are we mad? And yes, you're right. We shouldn't. We should all. There's lots of cases where you don't know, and it feels very mysterious, and that's right. But like I'm saying, intrinsically, why does it make us mad if that we're getting different prices?
Well, why? I mean, I agree. I mean, it's patently offensive. Why should I be paying more for the same exact good or service than the person who lives next door to me? And I think the offensiveness is also tied to how this whole scheme functions. Like, why am I being charged a different price than the person who lives next door to me? What do they know about me that is causing them to charge me a different price? I think it's predatory and it is it's exploitative of personal information about you that is being plugged into a computer algorithm to dictate and predict how much you specifically are willing to pay for something. I mean, there's a violation and it's almost like a privacy violation, but it's something else. It is a fairness thing.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like attacking us as a society because like prices in some sense are social, right? Like we knowing a price, all of us kind of knowing a price gives us information about our society. It kind of helps create a public in some sense. And charging different prices is like an attack on us as a public or as a society. I don't want to get too abstract there. I got too abstract already, but like I do think there's something like it's really caused me doing this work has really caused me to like think deeply about like prices as kind of a moral question. I mean, there used to be all sorts of discussions of moral prices and whatnot, which we
Yeah.
like got rid of, but it does feel moral.
Well, as I'm an optimist, so I think that, this new problem is a vector to restart some of those conversations. But if we could take a big step back and maybe talk about like how prices are set or how
Hmm.
people think prices are set, I think it might be helpful to lay some of that groundwork. So, um, you know, I think a lot of people still kind of conventionally think of price meaning the cost to produce a good or service plus a little profit on top. And that's what's being
Hmm.
charged to you. I mean, this is the concept of like marginal cost pricing. I think if you go study economics in college, they throw that concept out of the window within the first 15 minutes of the first class. Like nobody does marginal cost pricing anymore. It
Well,
is,
let me
yeah,
before we get. I think that's a really powerful point, and I want to draw that out because I think that you
yeah,
said something there. You implied something there that is profound, which is that people basically think that the value of something is based on how difficult it was to make it, right? Like the
right.
labor, like if it takes a lot of time and effort to make something, it's more valuable. And then, you want to add a little profit so that for the cost of capital or whatever. But value is comes from the labor it took to make something. And that's sort of the essence of what you're saying. Is that fair?
Yeah, cost of producing something, the labor that went into it, those are kind of the fundamental kind of underpinnings of, the exchange of value for things in our society. I mean, it's very basic. I would say that, this notion of surveillance pricing is obliterates that nexus between cost and value on the one side and price. Like there is no nexus between these things. Price is constructed in a completely different way that is profoundly new. That has, it has its evolutionary foundation. I mean, going back, a couple of decades now, and a lot of technology, and surveillance, capitalism, and targeted advertising, things that were kind of, normalized in our society, and we kind of understand, kind of inform how we got here. So it's not altogether new, but it is certainly new in the price sense.
Right. So we have like, okay, it takes a lot of effort to make something, but then there's just like, do people want it? Right. And so if you can make something and it's really highly sought after, or if you can control, the supply of something, then the price has nothing to do with the cost it took to make it. And neither way of saying value is real, like, or is truthful, right? Because you could spend a lot of time and effort making something and it can be, not very important. Like, I mean, my daughter draws pictures. They're terrible. I don't think anyone would pay anything for those for that.
It
But
would be weird if they did. It
yeah,
would
she puts a lot of effort into it. No, I mean, but the basic point is that like, there are different ways of understanding what value is. And
yeah.
so these are that when you get to price, um, but what are you seeing? Like you've been working in the California legislature or with like in sort of a process to try to help them get a hold of some of the new techniques where companies are setting prices. So what are you seeing and what are you trying to address?
So, I think the problem that we're trying to address is that there's no framework under existing law for curbing this that really covers all the
Cur-
bases.
Curbing what? Curbing
Curbing
what?
surveillance pricing, this
Okay.
notion of individualized price discrimination, a different price
Hmm.
being charged to different consumers based on, their willingness to pay for something. And that
Mm,
willingness to pay concept kind of being core to what is dictating the price. And you see that it's like privacy law doesn't quite cover it.
right.
Notice and consent frameworks, like where you opt in to something, quote unquote, opt in through an adhesion contract and a terms of service, where this is buried 120 pages in. That doesn't quite cover this. You
Right.
don't quite get at it with equal protection law unless there is, discrimination between a protected class like race, gender, sexual orientation, religious affiliation. That doesn't quite get at it because the differences are actually more insidious, like your web browser history isn't a protected
Mm.
class. So, we're trying to keep pace, I think, with what I euphemistically referred to as price innovation with
Price,
some
happy, fun time.
price happy fun time, with some regulatory happy fun time.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a real meaningful role for regulation to play, to kind of, box in some of these bad behaviors and guide innovation in a productive direction. That's my optimistic Pollyanna take on what we're trying to do with new bills to, essentially ban surveillance price setting.
So there are certain areas, like if I'm a great driver and, my friend is a bad driver, it makes sense for us to have different prices for our car insurance. And there, like in insurance, there is personalized pricing. That's why actuaries exist. And no one is like, that's bad, right? So there's certain areas where it is fine to price things based on the individual attribute. So what's the sort of space where that's not okay?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of these bills will just categorically exempt a lot of insurance policy stuff because there's a whole regulatory framework for, ensuring the accuracy of information to inform that sort of thing, right? So these are heavily regulated price regimes, that are kind of a separate bucket. I agree. But what we're talking about in these bills is a price being set based on a broader category, not just of, personal information, but also your, behaviors. Whether you are being charged a different price for something because of your past purchase habits. And
Hmm.
there are, a ton of examples about this that I think illustrate the problem very well. Like for example, say you're a consumer who's being profiled as a new parent. Maybe you had an online registry for a baby shower recently. So the consumer or the corporation knows that you're a new parent. And now a consumer may intentionally be shown a higher price for a baby thermometer on the first page of a search result. Based on their residential zip code, on their time of purchase, on the fact that they are a new parent. If you have previously used, like a fast delivery shipping method, the corporation may or the retailer may predict that you are less price sensitive. If you recently filed divorce papers, what if you're a single parent and are now more vulnerable to paying a higher price for diapers or you're buying, I don't know. You get the kind of how these examples kind of iterate. They're all over the place, and they're not, tied to a protected class. They're often protected about or predicted by, specific information about you. Say on the wage side, which we've not really talked about so much, but say, I just took out a loan, or I just applied for a new line of credit, or my credit score is in the dumps, or I am super deep in debt. I might be more willing to work for a lower wage because of my financial precarity,
Hmm.
because I need money more than the person next to me. And a gig platform, a rideshare platform might know that about me and offer me a lower wage to perform the same exact job that I am equally equipped to do, as the worker next to me. So these kinds of things are in the crosshairs of new regulation, that we're trying to just stop this behavior outright, before it, gains an even deeper hold.
So what are the kinds of proposals that you have to address? I mean, it's interesting you bring up price and wage because wage is a form of price, but what are the proposals you're sort of suggesting to address this kind of personalized pricing?
Right. That's one of
How,
my favorite things to say is that wages are the price of labor.
right.
Wages are a price. Legislation that has been introduced in Colorado, California, Illinois, Georgia, I think there are a couple other states out there by now, are all, essentially saying you can't do surveillance pricing. You can't individually discriminate between consumers on price. There are exceptions to this, and those exceptions are where a lot of the meat is. Like, we're not prohibiting matinee movie pricing. We're not prohibiting senior discounts or veteran discounts.
But it seems clear that you know, those are clearly delineated classes, right? So
yeah,
it's not, no one is saying, well, we don't like senior discount or veteran discount at the movies because you can see that they list it and then they say this is a class and everybody understands it.
right.
So
They're
that's
they're
not,
they're they're publicly posted. Everybody's aware that they exist. The terms are applied consistently across the people who are who qualify for those discounts. So there's a lot of kind of like benign behavior that we're not trying to get into, and it's important to think about it that way because you know again, it narrows the problem. It narrows the solution to the problem, which is this discrimination on price between individuals, based on more insidious classifications, and data sets, that are predicting things about them.
it's interesting. I was just thinking about it. It's like I was saying I would be mad if on the Band-Aid thing where if you paid $7 and I paid 7.20 just because it's a difference in price, it would make me angry. But I don't get mad when you go to the movies and see or go and see like there's a student discount or something like that doesn't just it doesn't strike me as unfair, which I think is like another way of saying, we have as a society we recognize there are just different groups that have different needs and different prices for those needs. Or you know so
Yeah,
anyway.
but you can envision though when that grouping, when it's not just students or seniors, but when the bands of data are being used to create groupings, based on what if it's people who buy skirts and expensive cat food. Like, then if a person if you're being charged a different price based on that kind of granular information about you, it's no longer these acceptable categories. It's these really kind of like gross,
Well,
exploitations of information.
I would sort of observe that based on what we're seeing with AI and sort of some of the things I've been reading from, Mark Zuckerberg, among others, it at some level we won't know how the discrimination is happening. Some model will just spit out a price for you and a price for me based on, you know, millions of inputs that and no one will be able to tell like, oh, it's because, I'm into this and you're into that. It'll just be like, that's what the model said.
Right.
Um, and so which is an interesting problem in and of itself. So okay, so let's move to a like that seems pretty straightforward to say, all right, personalized pricing isn't we can't do that like based on personally identifiable characteristics. But what kind of pushback are you receiving?
Well, I think the good faith pushback is actually things that we've already been discussing. This notion that we don't want to prohibit senior discounts. We don't want to,
Okay, yeah.
prohibit, holiday specials or,
Mhm.
so, and those things are easy to account for. They're, widely advertised, consistently applied, understandable things that people know and are aware of. I think, where the pushback becomes, I think, more insidious and bad faith is this notion that optimizing prices on an individual level or discriminating between price at an individual personalized level is going to distribute or is going to lead to kind of long-term welfare effects that actually you're going to end up paying a lower price over time because you are being offered a discount. And don't we want that, to be the case? And I think I think the fundamental problem with that is that this notion of a discount suggests the presence of a normal set or quote unquote right price that is connected to cost and value when really what you're being offered as a discount might be an arbitrary targeted price discounted from some arbitrary higher price. You see a slashed $90 for something and you're getting charged $66. Well, is it a discount if the price is just kind of made up? Or is it a targeted advertisement based on your personal characteristics and your personal vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, psych research on the psychology of pricing showing, yeah, people love to feel like they're getting a deal even. So you just raise the price and then say, oh, you're getting a discount. And that's definitely one way to do it. Well, okay, so there's another problem that you're dealing with too, which is this the problem of algorithms. So companies that are maybe, there's kind of the coordination we've talked about with RealPage, which is the allegedly conspiracy, and that's pretty direct. They're sharing competitively sensitive information across rivals, and you see it in a number of different areas. And I think we understand what that is doing, and it probably is covered by existing price fixing laws. But what about some of the looser stuff? Like what kind of things are happening in the economy? Let's start with what's happening in the economy that feels off, but isn't, sort of standard price fixing.
Um, sure. I mean, I do think that this individualized price discrimination is falls into that bucket. I think that
Well,
might be what
yeah.
you're, yeah.
Well,
Um,
I was thinking the like rumors about Airbnb and its algorithms, like putting like certain listings ahead of other listings, and like recommendations from Zillow or stuff like that, where it's like not, it's not like Zillow is kind of like setting the price of homes, but like they're offering kind of a recommendation here, or there's like a lot of things happening with recommendation engines that are not necessarily connected to rivals the way that RealPage was. Is there anything that you're seeing there?
Yeah, I think that, and some of this is kind of in the early stages of investigation, but we're looking at how platforms offer tools that can be used to inform the setting of a price, right?
Hmm.
So, say you have Amazon offers a smart pricing tool
Hmm.
to tens of thousands of retailers who use its e-commerce platform. These are independent businesses who are trying to sell stuff on Amazon's broader store, and they're being told, hey, if you use our smart pricing algorithm, you might have a better shot of getting into the featured buy box
Hmm.
on Amazon's
Hmm.
platform. And I, there are a lot of facts. Those facts are starting to play out in interesting
Is that an actual
litigation.
situation, or is that an alleged? Are we in, this might be happening, but we're not sure.
That is a practice that is being kind of played out and investigated and teased out in, yeah, I think the Federal Trade Commission's litigation against Amazon.
Hmm.
Also, California has a case that predates the FTC's case against Amazon, where some of these pricing behaviors are being vetted and understood. But
Okay,
I, but
so
I
yeah, yeah.
but I think it's a pretty kind of I think it's a pretty benign observation that some form of this is going on. That if you use Amazon's smart pricing algorithm, you're going to have a better shot of getting into the buy box. There are other, what we call minimum price restraints, minimum resale price restraints, most favored nation clauses that say, if you're selling something on Amazon, Amazon might restrict you from selling it at a cheaper price at Walmart because they don't want to be undercut on price at one of their competitors' stores or alleged competitors. I know there's a dispute about whether Amazon and Walmart actually compete against each other. But let's stick with this example about, you know, use my smart pricing tool and you'll have a better chance of appearing in the buy box. Or say you are a short-term rental platform and are offering a similar smart pricing tool and on the condition and it's being offered to you as a way to appear higher in search results on a short-term rental platform. So those might not look like, price fixing schemes between competitors, between two different, short-term rental operators or two different retailers who are trying to sell staplers on Amazon. But there's a coercive vertical effect there that is essentially depriving those independent businesses of their authority, of their autonomy to set a price in the market. So there's an old case called Interstate Circuit from the 1930s, I want to say, famous price fixing case that describes this as a fundamental need to preserve independent centers of decision making. I love that phrase,
Hmm.
independent centers of decision making. And that when
Hmm.
you have independent centers of decision making, competition can occur between them. But when you start pulling some sort of competition out of that dynamic, when you pull their independence away from them, even if it's not a total a total restraint, but even like a partial deletion of some competition from a market, you start to lose the competitive drive that delivers consumer benefits, that delivers lower prices. So on these platforms, if you're, two independent, otherwise independent retailers being, coerced into using a smart pricing tool, you are being deprived of your independent decision making. Your decision making is being constrained by this imperative to get into that featured buy box or to appear higher in a search result. So I think, we're starting to observe these ways that platforms specifically are restricting competition at the same time as they're making these retailers dependent on them for their own viability as a business.
So it occurs to me that there's something here, and I don't really know how to phrase this, but there's something that really makes me think about the stock market. Because if I have a share of IBM stock and I want to sell it, and I'm like, get me the market price, there's someone who, I can set a limit, right? I can say, I want to sell it if the price reaches $100 or whatever. But if I just go like, I want to sell my IBM stock, go sell it. Like the broker that I use goes out to what's called a market maker, and that person or entity, finds someone, figures out kind of roughly where people are buying and selling IBM stock and gets me a price roughly in that area. And they make a little bit of money on the spread because they probably hold a little bit of IBM stock to make sure that they can like make it all work, right? And like we don't think about that as kind of like coercive, right? Even though like I don't really have an independent decision-making center about the price of the IBM stock that I can sell. I mean, I could set a limit order again, but like, how does a short-term rental platform's algorithm recommending prices, but saying you don't have to take this, but you'll have a better shot. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Let's just take a hypothetical. How does that differ from what I'm talking about, where like there really is a IBM stock being sold in the stock market?
Yeah, I think and I don't know all of the specifics of how stock trading works. I work at a nonprofit, so I don't dabble in that
Give
space
me the
much.
specifics of how stock trading works in detail.
No, but I think what you're talking about, Matt, is the difference between a third party pricing tool or algorithm. I think a lot of what you're talking about is done by computers that implements your own strategy, as opposed
I
to
like that. I like that's your observation. You're like that's the level of knowledge you have about the stock market. I think they use computers.
Yeah. Well, but it's like, in every way that we talk
I'm
about this, it's not like people walking around doing this, as human beings. They're delegating authority to markets to do certain things, or delegating authority to software to do certain things. And so, there's a huge difference between delegating to a piece of software. Please implement my strategy. This is my personal strategy. Implement it. Buy more when it hits this price. Sell when it hits this price. That is, strategy implementation. On a business's side, you can envision how, you might set, individual parameters like, hey, when my competitor's price drops by 10% more than mine, decrease my price by this much. And you can program those strategies and have a piece of software implement them. Big difference, though, between telling a piece of software, implement my strategy, my independent decision making, and delegating to a piece of software, why don't you just set my prices? Why don't you just come up
Mm,
with the strategy and then set my prices? And that is the problematic part. That delegation of authority is kind of at the center of a price fixing conspiracy. And the software is what is coming up with the strategy and conforming the rules of the price setting. So, a third-party algorithm might have an imperative or a desire to, increase prices as much as they can, over, a period of time. On a short-term rental platform, maybe they get a set fee based on the number of bookings on the relative occupancy. So they get a flat fee per, night stayed at a short-term rental. But it's the third-party algorithm that is dictating the strategy. On a, rental housing platform, it might be that, they are doing, a third-party market analytics thing, and saying like, okay, we understand that you could probably lease out. The competitive range of prices is between 2,100 and 2,400. But since we have, this imperative to sell our product as something that can maximize price, we're going to go with that higher range every time. So it's that delegation of a strategy to a third party that is really, the difference between market making and market fixing.
and then I think that there's something interesting about what, if we go back to the question of an Amazon or let's not say Amazon, let's say a large online platform that sells goods and services, or lots of goods in America, or a short-term rental platform, or lots of other ways of sort of selling things. They they offer like a market making function or a pricing function. But then they also, I think this might be a difference between them and the stock market. They have an interest in seeing more things sold or fewer things sold, or having the price go up or having the price go down or something, because they make money based on the pricing. Maybe it's that, I mean, maybe there's like I know the extent of stock market knowledge is they use computers, but I also think it's regulated in different ways. Like there are conflicts of interest we are aware of in just in stock trading. There's a very heavily regulated structure saying like you can't, be a broker on both sides of the same
Yeah,
transaction, for example. Um,
yeah.
and because there's basic conflicts of interest there. So is one of the elements here in terms of like, as we kind of take the real world and make it more financial markety, is one of the elements here that there's some sort of conflict of interest embedded in some of these algorithms that are guiding prices?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, take the e-commerce platform example, and this, notion that they are telling a third-party retailer, you can't charge a higher price on our platform than you charge for that product on a separate platform. It might be in the third party retailer's interest to set a higher price because maybe, for instance, the delivery or fulfillment service of that e-commerce platform is, higher than it costs them to provide a good or service on another forum, whether that's a brick and mortar store or another, e-commerce platform. So the interest in third party sellers being able to set their own prices according to costs and value is in direct conflict with
Mm.
the e-commerce platform's, interest in restraining price setting to make sure that they are maintaining competition with their competitors. So you see that fundamental conflict in play there. I think it's really relevant. I think this is why you see platforms, coercing independent businesses to sacrifice their independent decision making. You see, that coercion playing out when a platform is causing a retailer to act against their economic self-interest, which they might do in any number of ways. These are kind of elements of price fixing cases going back 100 plus years. But we're seeing them in different ways as platforms become kind of the dominant middlemen in our markets.
Right. And it's so there's a middleman issue here. And we're also seeing it increasingly with wages, which is different. So I guess to kind of conclude, right, I want to get back to like a bigger question here. And let's get to your foolish optimism. Okay. Um, so you're saying like we used to have like moral, I don't know, moral pricing or all sorts of you go back to the 1600s, you can find people saying there's a moral price for this, for that, for this other thing. Um, but we sort of lost that rhetoric. Are you finding when you're dealing with politicians who are not really used to this, like to these arguments, like it's relatively new for most people because it's new for everyone, like pricing, having to redefine pricing laws. Are you seeing, like, what are you seeing in that debate? Are you seeing kind of light bulbs go on for people being like, oh, there are interesting political questions here? Or are you just like getting a sense of like, it's just to people being like, fix this technical issue, and then we'll move on to yelling about, some social issue we really care about?
Yeah, it's a lot of light bulbs going on. And I think it speaks to the need to educate people over and over and over again. I mean, I don't think people know how prices are set today in today's market, but people are fundamentally shocked at the unfairness that they might be charged more for a plane ride home because an airline knows that they need to get to a funeral on a certain date. Like that, there's a gut feeling of unfairness that people understand immediately when you explain to them, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what is going on in the market today. So that is actually a really cool thing to be a part of, is educating people on how this is happening and hearing people say, oh yeah, I had that. I kind of had something like that happen to me. That's weird. So it's a lot of light bulbs, which is really exciting. But I think we do also need to get back to this kind of moral conversation around pricing. I'm kind of, despite my optimism, I think that we're on a collision course for a very dystopic future. I mean, I think that we are, barreling toward some form of disastrous economic structure. And people kind of look at me with, like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat when I start there, like you have to kind of do the explanation of how we're experiencing things happening in order to get to, yeah, and this is why it's really, really, really dangerous because I think we're headed toward an economy that is going to be structured by large corporations, platforms who are constantly testing the limits of our financial
Mm,
precarity, who are
mm.
completely controlling uh, economic sentiment, consumer sentiment across the markets. And I think that that's really, really troubling, and not just troubling, because we all recognize it's happening, but even more troubling because they're depriving us on an individual level of the shared experience of this. They are depriving individuals of the awareness that this is going on, so it sucks out of the room the collective response to abusive pricing practices. I just think it's really, really, really troubling to assign that function completely to corporations.
So I guess last thing is, when you talk to a lot of people about pricing, right? Usually there's sort of like an instinct. I think an instinct on the right is, oh, you got to let the market decide, let everyone set, whatever constraints or pricing they want. And that's oversimplifying it, but like they're generally more favorable for things like coordination and collusion. Not always, but often because they think it's a constraint, which it is, sort of is a constraint on price setters. On the other hand, when you see on the left, and I think, we're both sort of more on the left, The idea is we need to do something about prices. Let's like have the government control the price. Let's lower the price. We'll just have price setting from an administrative agency or something. But you're not saying that. You're saying what we need, whatever the price is, if the price goes up or down, it should be the same price for everyone. But it shouldn't be like it shouldn't be like a controlled price by the state or some sort of entity. Or is that like, do you see a like, is that right? And if so, like, how are you moving people from we need the state to set prices to like actually it's really about ensuring that there's kind of like a consistency to prices across society?
Yeah, I think in this specific context on the surveillance pricing side, it is about kind of a desire for uniformity, for some predictability in how prices are set. When you don't have that information as an individual consumer, you are deprived of, I think, something that we can all relate to, this ability to comparison shop. And to understand that you can go get a cheaper price somewhere else. And that's particularly relevant when prices are being coordinated at the same time across multiple competitors. I think that yeah, there's a very dangerous part of not allowing consumers to know what the price should be. We joke about The Price is Right as this kind of like 60-year-old, 70-year-old show. That the
Yeah.
fundamental basis of which was like, hey, you can predict a price, you can be good at it or bad at it, but you kind of know that there's a right price. We're losing sight of that. That the price can be right.
So you've thought about different ways, like what's actually a morally offensive about different prices for different people for the same thing?
Yeah, well, think about it this way. Your dollar is worth a different amount than the dollar of the person next to you. Um, and a corporation is dictating the value of the currency that you have in your pocket. So when you set a different price for the same price or good, or for the same good or service, that is a corporation's way of dictating how much your dollar is worth. And I think that that is kind of a shocking idea to folks.
I guess we'll leave it there. I appreciate your time. Thanks for spending an hour with us explaining like your experiences with pricing and really on the cutting edge. So thanks.
Right on. Thank you.
I thought that was really interesting, and I don't want to spend too much time kind of pontificating myself, but I just had two thoughts about what my conversation with Lee. And the first is, we talked about price discrimination and forms of personalized pricing, largely in the context of being a consumer or being a worker. But there's this other element to it, which is that if you're a business person, it has a really interesting effect on markets. So if I'm one of the tactics that monopolists use is price discrimination. So if I'm like trying to deal with like let's say I'm a monopolist in teddy bears or something like that, and someone else is like that monopolist is charging too much for teddy bears, and then they go to a toy store, or they go to a city and they say, "Hey, I can get you teddy bears for cheaper than that monopolist." Well, one of the things I could do is if I knew who is thinking about buying the teddy bears from my rival, I could keep the prices of my teddy bears lower than anybody who was trying to buy my rival's teddy bears. And then anybody that was not trying to do that, I'd keep the price high. So that would be a way of preventing someone from always making it impossible to get into a market, right? And we do see this on a regular basis. Companies often have what are called rights of first refusal in contracts, which say like if if somebody comes to you to offer the service that I'm offering you for a better price, you have to come to me and I get the right to sell it to you at that better price. And that's a way of fortifying a market, making sure that no one can get into that market by offering a better price, because then the monopolist can just say, well, I'll lose a little bit of money here to prevent entry. Standard Oil did this, like it's a pretty common thing. So that's like one of the classic reasons for that price discrimination is dangerous, aside from some of the things that we talked about. There's just gut sense of unfairness. The other thing that it struck me, and I've thought a lot about this, and I've actually had many conversations with Lee about these different pricing games, is that, one of the things that is sort of happening in our societies is it feels like things are more and more turning into finance that shouldn't be, right? When you go into the store and you want to buy something, or when you want to order something online, a toy or a food or shoe or whatever it is, like, should you really have to engage in some sort of financial strategy to get the best price or to avoid, a sort of collusion or pricing games? Does everything really have to be about making sure there's a liquid financial market for whatever that product is? I think what I saw a couple of years ago when I used to follow, I used to have these discussions with people who were super into crypto, is there was this vision, or they have this vision, which I think they still have, that, what we really need is for liquidity in every financial market. And so they would do things, and they would say, like, just like a stock, if there are, 10 jugs of milk at the store, we're going to have all of these different, like, pricing arrangements to make sure that it's just the most efficient way of selling the milk. And you will get to bid in these ways, and you'll get to program an agent to get your bidding. And I remember thinking, like, this is just nuts. Like, this is just turning everything into, like, a hassle and a scam and a financial game. And it kind of, like, occurs to me that if businesses are really investing in what I think Lee called price innovation or price happy fun time, then they're not actually innovating. They're spending their time, like, not actually making better products or stuff that people want. They're spending their time messing around with just, like, pricing games and causing everything to become a hassle and, like, finance. And I don't think that's a society that we want to live in. So anyway, those are just sort of two thoughts in about the new wild world of pricing. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with another episode of Organized Money.
Organized money.